and Rachel, and the acting CEO, and the Constitution Hill Trust, which is represented by multiple people in the room, including its chair, who wears many hats, but tonight she's here as the chair of the Constitution Hill Trust. It's our pleasure indeed to invite you into this very special room, the foyer of the Constitutional Court. The court was designed to be warm, friendly, open, legible, accessible, based on the principles of justice under the tree. Pius Langa was very amused when these pillars were all skew, but they actually serve engineeringly the building very well, so it allows this big grand open space where we can now sit together. And this place where everyone can feel welcome, even so welcome that they can demonstrate peacefully outside the front doors of the court. That wasn't prearranged entertainment. So we have a wonderful assembly here this evening, including former President Kgalema Motlanthe and Mrs. Motlanthe, members from the government, former ministers, members from the academia, diplomatic corps, visitors from abroad, legal representatives, people from the legal profession, Democrats, booksellers, book lovers and booksellers, and people from all walks of life. And we also welcome you at home who are joining us via the live streaming. You're all very, very, very welcome. Tonight's event is a celebration and the culmination of a number of years of intense scholarly work to produce this extraordinary document, which is a very important piece of history. Dear Comrade President, the foundations of South Africa's Constitution. Oliver Tambo, forget the most important words. Oliver Tambo and the foundation of South Africa's Constitution. The program will start with Natasha Ali, the acting CEO of the Oliver and Tambo Foundation, who will remember Oliver Tambo on today, his 105th birthday. She will go on to introduce Professor Nomalanga Mkhize from Tembeka University, who will facilitate a conversation between Professor Andre Odendaal, Justice Albie Sachs, and Thandiwe Matthews, PhD candidate. We received information this morning, unfortunately, from Tembeka Toby advocate, that he cannot attend tonight. He explained that he has another function where his book called Land Matters is shortlisted for the Alan Paton Awards. So that's where he's at. And so we'll hold thumbs for him that his book makes it. Well, thumbs. Thumb for Albie and thumbs for us. After a few minutes of Q&A, Cheryl Carolus, our chair of the Constitution Hill Trust, will share with us a few words and give us a vote of thanks. And then we invite you to stay afterwards for some lovely snacks and refreshments that are being laid on for us by Food I Love and company that sits on the other side of the Constitution Hill Precinct. There's a lot of activity going on here. When you have time, you really must come back to come and see all the activity at the moment. Beside the people on the front door, there's also a festival that ends on the weekend called Basha Uhuru. Lots of engagements, conversations, dialogues, exhibitions, and so on. And then, of course, we'll have the book on sale, and the authors will be happy to sign your copy. And so now, Natasha, I hand the podium to you.
You have 12 million people in South Africa who are treated as if they were subhumans. We don't want this status. We are rejecting it entirely. And we want to be liberated, or to liberate ourselves. If nobody will do that, we will liberate ourselves so that in South Africa, I should feel that I'm a human being in that country. And I don't feel so now at all. I feel I'm a stranger, a foreigner, and at best, an animal in South Africa. This is how I feel.
The strength of his speaking came from the clarity of the thought and the deep, honest integrity that lay at the heart of everything that he said.
Everybody knows that his role was absolutely critical. Nobody else could have done it.
He was a man of peace. He wasn't a man of war.
You know, they say history is written by the victors. In South Africa, we haven't written our history. The memory of Tambo should really be cherished.
He was a towering figure that activists like me looked up to, worshipped.
He had great intellect, but he was also very down to earth, very simple, very humble.
Oliver is the greatest of the great.
One of the greatest presidents the ANC had, definitely. One of the greatest presidents the ANC had. And I think with time, both the ANC and the people of South Africa will begin to appreciate that.
It became clear across the world that this was a man of integrity, dedicated, giving his life for the freedom of his people, and also somebody who was deeply religious. It was very reassuring to a lot of people in the Western countries. He wasn't a communist.
He was respected because of his brilliant mind. When he presented to the United Nations, Africa felt proud. Independent Africa felt, that's our leader. He was a supreme diplomat.
Oliver Tambo was the father of the ANC for 30 or more years. There are not many people that can be trusted and faithful for 30 years.
I'm insisting that with regard to all of these strategic interventions which made the 1994 democratic victory possible, we had Oliver Tambo as a decisive, leading, and defining player. And for this reason, I have no hesitation to convey my heartfelt view to Oliver Tambo that we should bestow the title, the father of South Africa's democracy.
Good evening, everyone. That is the clip from O.R. Tambo, The Jewel in Our Crown, and it is a documentary about O.R. directed by Dali Tambo. As Vanessa mentioned, my name is Natasha Ali, and I'm the acting CEO of the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation. Today marks 105 years since the birth of Oliver Reginald Tambo. Born in the village of Kantolo in eastern Pondoland, this humble, gentle boy went on to become one of the greatest leaders of the African continent. I have worked at the Tambo Foundation for a decade. In fact, I was the first full-time employee. And 10 years later, I'm still amazed every day to learn about the Tambos. But most importantly, about their values and how they underpinned everything that they did. The first CEO of the Tambo Foundation, Mavuso Msimang, who you saw in the video, tells a beautiful story of how OR and delegates of the ANC were invited to a conference in Geneva for the World Council of Churches. OR was handed an envelope of money and asked what it was, and the person answered, "It's your per diem." And he said, "What is a per diem?" And he said, "Well, it's your daily stipend to pay for the things while you're on your trip." And he said, "But our food is paid for, our accommodation is paid for. What do I need this money for?" And the person responded, "Well, buy some presents for the people at home or anything." OR took everyone's money back, leaving them with only a fraction of what had been in the envelopes, and said, "There are people in the camps that need this money more than we do. They need it to buy soap and other necessities. Send this money to Zambia. We cannot justify being given this money." It is this sense of humility, dignity, justness, fairness, respect, and servant leadership that we believe is the true Tambo legacy. It is these values that should form the foundation of each of our lives. And it is these values that form the foundation of our Constitution. This year, I've been doing a fellowship in public leadership and service through Future Elect. And through our seminars and work, I've realized that what we all have in common is values very similar to those of OR. While the majority of the fellows are South African, we have fellows from all over the SADC region. To have them both in the program and here tonight is an example of another of Tambo's values, Pan-Africanism. Many of us will go on to become the next leaders and public servants of Africa. And as we all listen to this incredible panel this evening and learn about the origins of the Constitution, I hope everyone here continues to emulate the values of what I, in my very unbiased opinion, believe to be the greatest public servant that ever existed. And apply these values in your communities, your jobs, your countries, and your regions. Tonight is the culmination of Tambo Month, a jubilee of events celebrating OR's legacy. Oliver the teacher, Oliver the lawyer, the intellectual, the statesman, the diplomat, even Oliver the golfer and the choral music composer. But Oliver, the quiet, principled revolutionary, is the Oliver we celebrate today and every day. With that, I say happy birthday to a great man, and thank you all for coming to his birthday party. A party befitting someone 105 years old. I now hand over to our facilitator for the evening, Professor Naledi Nomalanga Mkhize. Professor Mkhize is a historian based at the Nelson Mandela University in Tembeka. She's the acting director for the School of Governmental and Social Sciences, and her research interests are in African language, historical literatures, vernacular historiography, and 19th century Eastern Cape history. She has a much longer bio, but I know you don't want to listen to me anymore, so thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Natasha, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for bringing me out of the rural areas into the metropolitan area. And whenever I come to Joburg, I always feel like, Thandi comes to town, like Gautrain. Not this Thandi, but yeah, it does feel like that because I drove in, when we went in Rosebank, I was like, it's so well developed. Anyway, we are fine there. So yes, let us make this a birthday. You are correct, because Albie says we must make it a birthday. We must celebrate the culmination of this amazing book and to celebrate it today. So welcome everybody. The program is very simple. Andre is going to speak because he wrote the book. And then Albie will follow because he helped Andre write the book. And then Thandi will respond because she is the youth league today. So that's how it's going to work, and it's going to be relaxed, and then we will open up for conversation with everybody. I was asked to make a few remarks on the book because I was given the chance to write the foreword. So the foreword is what I managed to contribute a little to this process. But I don't have much to say except, I was going through I was saying to you, I was going through the end notes. And I don't know if it's just because I'm trained in history, but go through the end notes on their own. That's what I want to say about the book today, because it's like a map, it's like an archive of the South African liberation story that is hardly told in the form that Andre has told it in. And also, I think what's really important about the book is that even though it's this very meticulously footnoted thing, okay? And I think when I saw some of the first versions also, I could see Albie's notes next to it. So that's going to have to be an artifact on its own. But it's interesting for someone to have the capability to write a book with very meticulous footnoting and yet bring the whole political sentiment and whole political mood out in those pages. You can feel Paulo Jordan, you can feel, the Zola Square, you can feel people as they are in that book. You can feel OR in that book. So congratulations. We are here to celebrate you and celebrate all the work that's been put in. And I'm just going to read your bios so that there's a flow. Of course, what I decided to do was I'm just going to update their bios. There's no point in me reading the whole bio of either Albie or Andre. So you all know Andre as a writer, but he is also currently a writer in residence and honorary professor in history and heritage at the University of the Western Cape, UWC. And his latest books, other than the one we are here for, are Pitch Battles, Sports, Racism and Resistance, which he wrote with Peter Hain, as well as a book on Robben Island as the first national heritage institution of a democratic South Africa with some co-writers as well. So he's been busy writing, and I know that he's got some stories to tell about writing so much over the past couple of years. Albie, also, we know your biography, but we'll just update it. Recently, Albie had the honor to meet Amal and George Clooney because they've inaugurated the Albie Awards, and he was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Clooney Foundation, and we had a wonderful conversation this afternoon for my benefit on what it was like to meet George and Amal in real life. Okay, yes, I was asking about George Clooney, it's fine, let me just admit. Okay, and then I will just, and then of course, in terms of our wonderful respondent, Ms. Thandiwe Matthews, let me just read her bio because this is, we are walking towards the future, and we need to remember who is taking up this mantle. Ms. Thandiwe Matthews is an admitted attorney, researcher, and lecturer, and published author. Currently, she's a PhD candidate in a joint scholarship program between the International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University, based in The Hague, Netherlands, and Wits University, under the South African Research Chair in Law, Equality, and Social Justice. Her doctoral research explores the role of constitutionally protected human rights to address systemic inequalities of race, gender, class, and age in post-1994 South Africa, with a specific focus on the right to social protection. And because it's a doctorate, we read the whole thing because her life is invested in this thing right now, and she's published in many academic journals. So with that, I would like to invite Andre, and you can address us. We've got about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nomalanga, and everyone here present. Thanks for being here, from the very notable people sitting in front to that naughty guy called Mac Maharaj in the second last row, who helped me tremendously with the book, and to the people in the back seats and also the people outside. It's wonderful for me to be here tonight, and I'll just, 2 reasons quickly. The first, in December 2013, my family and I came up to Johannesburg for a family wedding with Zora and I with our 3 children. And I thought that would be a good time to show them the Constitutional Court because it was so important to us. 2013 was also a time when we needed to, recognize the importance of those values. And we were planning to come on Wednesday the 5th, stayed in a guest house in Melville, and at about 5:15, I think, in the morning, for some reason, Cartoon Network was playing with this loud, horrible sound, and underneath it was the announcement that Madiba had passed away. So we took a white rose from the garden, came straight to the Constitutional Court, put it next to the eternal flame, and that day made me realize that we could no longer depend on some great figures from outside or from the past to take us forward, that we had to draw on ourselves, and I hope and I think my children got the message that day. So when I say it's a privilege to be in the sacred space, it's also because of the incredible history of this particular place, and also how it was invented to represent our new democracy. And you might not know that one of our superstars here, in terms of the Constitutional Court, and drawing up the Constitution was actually born in Florence Nightingale Nursery Home, which is about 300 yards from where we are now, just across the street. It used to be there, and if you look carefully, you'll still see Florence Nightingale there. So that is one privilege. And then Natasha and Vanessa, thanks very much for having me here. And to celebrate, to launch a book on the 105th anniversary of one of the giants of the making of South African democracy is very special as well. So I'm absolutely humbled to be here and happy to share with everyone this day. And I want to start with another birthday, and that was the 74th anniversary of the ANC. And Oliver Tambo, of course, was very involved. It was the 8th of January, 1986, and after the Kabwe Conference, the Council of War in 85, the ANC re-looked itself and got ready for the final struggle to bring about freedom in South Africa. And Tambo spoke at a news conference, and we see it up there. That was what he looked like on the 8th of January, 1986. And he called on the internal mass movement to make apartheid ungovernable in the year of MK. But he literally went from that meeting to another one, where he set up a secret committee called the Constitution Committee. And he said to them that all wars end at the negotiating table. And sensing the ANC and his fellows on the NEC, that the balance of forces was changing in favor of the liberation movement, he said that he wanted them to start preparing an outline for a constitutional framework for a future. Not a new constitution to be written, that had to be done in South Africa by representatives elected by the people, but to start putting the values and the vision and the framework for the future there. So when the time came for negotiations, the liberation movement would seize the initiative politically. And that happened on the 8th of January. Albie was one of those people, and I'll mention the others just now. And they immediately set to work. And the president gave them a specific mandate that that constitution must originate or be influenced by the Freedom Charter. It must be a multi-party democracy where people's rights are, every South African will be guaranteed their individual rights. And through a Bill of Rights was what he suggested. And that was quite a radical suggestion, coming at the time it did, at the height of the urban insurrection inside South Africa, and having just called this the year of MK. It was in a way the fifth pillar of the struggle that was being added to underground mobilization, to armed action, mass mobilization, and of course, broadening international solidarity and isolating the regime. Came a reconnection with a long tradition of constitutionalism in the ANC. And the committee under Jack Simons, with Zola Skweyiya as the deputy, immediately set to work, scrutinized clause by clause the Freedom Charter, and within 6 days had developed the skeleton, what they called the skeleton, an outline for a future constitution. But they had questions for the NEC, sent in the report. The NEC and the subcommittee under Paulo Jordan looked at it. Some felt it was too soon to be even talking about constitutional matters or a future constitution. And there was a lot of excitement, I would say, amongst the leadership in Lusaka in January '86 as a result of that first report. Eventually, the NEC sent to the committee a set of guidelines, 17 or 18, that they should use. Some of them absorbed what they had written, others were new. And by the end of September 1986, a new document called the Foundations of Government had been developed. And that was discussed by the full NEC on the 2nd of October 1986. And in principle, that idea of a future multi-party democracy and the protection of individual rights, and I keep using that word because it's very important, as you'll see just now, would be guaranteed. That was 1 month before Tambo and Thabo Mbeki met Mikhail Gorbachev in Moscow, and it was 36 months before the fall of the wall that the ANC had decided on this future course. So one of the big mythologies is that it was the Soviet Union that forced, amongst other people, that forced the ANC into negotiations. This happened 36 months before then. And after another 6 or 7 or 8 drafts, there was an in-house seminar in Lusaka in 1988, in March, and some of the people who were there are here with us today as well. And that seminar basically had ANC, more than 110 people from 21 countries throughout the world, looking at Zola Skweyiya's report with the air tickets that had to be bought. It was literally every capital city in different continents that you could, many cities there. A sign of how internationally the ANC had legitimized that struggle against apartheid and had developed a very broad international support. And that was robust debate, and the final constitutional guidelines were then issued in August 1988, and that was after around 15 drafts. In the book, we've tried to almost carbon date these developments. I've followed one track of this very broad and intense struggle, which is often left out almost completely in the history books of that period. So Luli has written an 800-page biography on Oliver Tambo, or Mark Visser's 800 pages. I think the Tambo one's a bit thinner, by Mark Visser and Luli, and relatively little is discussed about the Constitution because it was biography and numerous other aspects of the struggle that were covered there. So I looked at one aspect, the work of how the constitutional guidelines were developed. And it's an amazing story of innovation, initiative, political genius, I would say, in the end. Because having developed those guidelines, the next step was to create a platform for the new kind of politics to take place. And that happened through these 200 safaris that they were called, the meetings of South Africans with the ANC outside. And they happened at every level. Obviously the businessmen, and as soon as the businessmen had been there in 1985 towards the end, the UDF and COSATU, which was formed in December 85, were immediately in Lusaka as well, and eventually more than 200 groups. By 1987, as part of a deliberate strategy with preparations for each of those meetings, and exactly the same message, uncannily the same, came across in all of them. A broad front was created, and the divisions that the National Party was trying to create, the separation, the demonization of the ANC, for instance, in its 1987 electoral victory, 71% of white South Africans voted for the National Party, totally driven into the lager by the threat of a terrorist, a communist ANC. And those meetings, particularly important, was Dakar, was the Children's Conference in Harare, the Arusha conference with more than 600 international groupings, and the Culture in Another South Africa in Amsterdam, where the ANC started saying we must use the boycott selectively, and we must use the internal forces as part of, get them recognized as part of the forces for change. So that platform was created in a very systematic way, as the book shows. And the book must speak for itself. It's impossible in the 5 minutes Nomalanga's given me to tell that story. But the third phase started in late 1988 with the rapid geopolitical changes, Quito Carnivale, Namibia speeding forward to its independence. The time came for a final push to drive the regime into a corner that it could not get out of politically. And that, we all know, that led to the Harare Declaration, which laid down the conditions for the future and how that change should happen, with the constitutional guidelines as the values and the vision embedded in that. And the UDF and COSATU from 1986, and also incredible organizations like the Council of Churches and others, were strategizing together with the ANC on how to build this front for the future. And the Harare Declaration is an amazing tale that's told in this book. OR, as everyone loved him and called him, was literally had driven himself to the edge of his physical capacity. But in August, I think it was the 9th of August 1989, after meeting Nyerere and Salim and others in Tanzania, going to Harare, Lusaka, again, Angola and Botswana, he crossed they literally finalized that Harare Declaration, crossed the last T's and dotted the last I's, and he came to work early the next day for the NEC to approve it, and went from that meeting back to his office, although he was feeling ill, to meet with Thandiwe Mtintso, who was telling him about the conditions in the Angolan camps where she had to sleep in a truck to beg for food. And then Zola Skweyiya of the Constitution Committee, in a beautiful irony, was with him when he collapsed with a stroke. And his career was over, his contribution had been done. But what I argue here is that by December 1989, the template had been laid for the future of South Africa and the future of the Constitution, well before F.W. de Klerk made the announcements, ticking the boxes of the Harare Declaration, but not mentioning the ANC or the United Nations, which had finally rubber-stamped that document that had been drafted in Lusaka. It went from there to the OAU, to the Commonwealth nations, the non-aligned countries, and then to the United Nations General Assembly and Security Council. And F.W. de Klerk was given 6 months to implement those changes or face future total isolation. It's a beautiful story for me about African agency, which we don't realize when we read our history, that it was African who imagined, planned for, engineered, and won their freedom. Black South Africans were not given their freedom, they won it. And there's a remarkable story, a subtext in this. How come the ANC chose a multi-party democracy, what looks like a liberal democratic constitution, at the height of that revolutionary struggle? And it comes again to political thinking that's almost counterintuitive and debate happening within the ANC. So 43-year-old Paulo Jordan, head of research, was asked by Oliver Tambo to do a paper examining ruling class initiatives after the collapse of the tricameral initiatives. And he said there are 3 things that all of them share. The one is to derail the project of the national liberation movement and have third force alternatives put in place. The second is that they all have some form of group rights that they propose. That was from the Liberals. Colin Eglin, until 1988, told Margaret Thatcher that he was against one person, one vote in an undivided South Africa. The Brenthurst think tanks, the Verligters, who said change must come through the government, the Oorbeligters, who said other outside government must also come, but it must be consociatialism or federalism or some kind of group form. And of course the KwaZulu-Natal Indaba. And Paulo said the way to get around this, which is a reproduction of ruling class power, is to give one person one vote in a united country, which will in itself be a radical step, which will create a niche position for the ANC, unite and everyone is equal, which no one inside this country, although they professed this liberalism, was able to match. So that niche was created. But it was not just rights-based. As Penuel Maduna, who's here, said, it must be bread and freedom, that it had to be transformative, because the third part of Jordan's analysis was all these groups say that apartheid is the policy of the NP, and they don't see the systemic nature of exclusion and inequality in South Africa, and therefore we're going to need a transformative constitution that brings about freedom and bread. So the vision, if anyone says today, was a strange vision. It was radical, transformative, and anti-fascist constitution that was grounded in the realities of African struggles and life, and was the product of a multi-generational enterprise in which outstanding intellectuals contributed. And if you see that photo we had, Vanessa, can we just look at that photo quickly? Well, it's of Paulo Jordan with his father, A.C. Jordan, who wrote the first great Xhosa novel in the 1940s. Phyllis Jordan was his mother, who also wrote a life's mosaic. His grandfather studied at Zonnebloem College for the Sons of Chiefs in the 1880s. And that was the pedigree of the people who spoke in Lusaka and almost counterintuitively and with great vision and incredible skill, with its multiple struggles, brought the regime to force them to unban. So that was phase one of constitution making. 2 was 1990 to 94. Phase 3 was 94 to 96. All those phases need studies of their own to look in detail, so when people today talk about the Constitution, they at least know how it came into being. So let us debate the Constitution, but let us know how at least how it was formed. And that is when Teddy Pekane's funeral happened. I think it was around 2010-11. The SABC, Zola Square, tried to get the SABC to cover the funeral, but at that time the people in charge felt it was not really an event worthy of looking. And Zola Square said, we must not write our history in the sand, we must write it in concrete. And I hope, although this is a book, a thick one, that it has the weight of concrete, so that young people can learn about how this Constitution came into being. And I'd like to just pay tribute to the people, and do we even know the names of that Constitution Committee? The secretary was Zingisile Jobodwana, who was looking forward to tonight so much, but he couldn't come because he's had operations on both eyes in the last 2 weeks and still can't wear glasses even. So he's asked us to send his love, and he loves the book. Penuel Maduna, I did not recognize tonight. He's got magnificent gray hair of a distinguished person. like me. But when he was working in this book, he was 34 years old, half the age of Jack Simons, more than half. And he had an incredible experience in education. And it's wonderful to have you here today. I'd like you to come up and just be acknowledged with Albie, if Albie could come down. And also we'll call some other people up now too. Let Albie go down with you, Comrade. Thank you.
Ideas, father. Yes. Rushing towards me. It's a mistake nobody must make.
Wow, that was dramatic.
Good.
We made it, Madonna. Here we are. Now we had a crazy dream that one day we'd have a democratic constitution for South Africa. We were being hunted and chased. Madonna was living in a shack in Lusaka. When he entertained guests, he simply had a petrol drum. And they would sometimes bring whiskey, which they never saw there, and they'd put their glasses down on the petrol drum. I was blown up. Madonna was being chased by the security police. He had to leave Swaziland. We had nothing. We had no computers, of course. We didn't even have a photocopier, but we'd lived everywhere in the world. We'd experienced life in East Germany and West Germany. We'd been trained for military combat. We'd been trained for PhDs at universities. We brought our heart, our soul, our spirit with us. I'm so sad that Zola Skawia is not with us here today. I'm not sure if his son is in the audience.
Is Vuyo Skawia here? He was coming.
Zola is one of the heroes of our struggle. He never sang his own story, very laconic, very quiet, and he emerges as the key person all the way through. Ted Pakani, do we have members of Ted's family?
Yes, it's very, very special. Manana Pakani. Thank you very much. Can you move up a bit?
I'm scared I'll take another dive.
No. Oh, this time I'm taking you. This time I'm standing here.
Professor, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Okay, you're taking photos?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me move these.
Can you imagine we're driving in Lusaka, and I think Ted was driving and Madonna commenting on how terrible the Lusaka drivers were.
Yeah.
And there we were going to a meeting to start planning and imagining a new constitution. We didn't make policy. We simply took the policy from our leaders, from the NEC, from Oliver Tambo, and we crafted it. We discussed it. We prepared texts. Anybody else from...
Yes, definitely, Albie. Is Nkuli Mabandla here? Please come up. Obviously, Bridget Mabandla is one of our ambassadors, so she's not here. So Nkuli, thank you very much. Please come up.
Yeah.
And then... so Bridget and Jobs can't be here. We've also got two youngsters here, Bulelani Nguka and Vusi Pikoli, who later joined the Constitution Committee. Could you also come up? Yeah.
Yes, Bulelani is here, yeah.
I was just thrilled to see the president here.
One of the beautiful things of the book, for me, the visual narrative is very important when you tell a story about African agency, and that was the photographs there were given to me by the family. So thank you very much, everyone who's here, for contributing to that, and George Jobodwana as well, who's not here.
Okay, so let's cheer the appearance of the book, the reunion of the committee,
No one's coming back here.
and the possibilities of South Africa recovering that spirit, recovering that confidence, recovering the idealism, recovering the virtue, being the best of ourselves.
Thank you. Thanks, Albie. And thank you once again, Cornell Trust and the Tambo Foundation. And Vanessa says each person will get one of these, and they must please sign it as well. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Oh no, Andre was complaining about my grade.
I've finished now. Could the photos just come up again? Okay, there are the individual people, Jack Simons, who we remember, and Bridget Mabandla, Terry Pekani, with a report of visiting Swaziland after the assassination of Cassius Marke. Next photo, please.
Kader Asmal.
And
Kader Asmal.
And Kader Asmal's family were at the Cape Town launch as well, so thank you very much. There are the first words of that first document in January '86. And Peñol Maduna and Albie Sachs, who lived together in Mozambique at one stage. Can we go quickly through them, the last few? And of course, OR with those conferences, the Africa Claims document of '43, Luthuli, the connection with the legacy. Next ones. And those are two very, very amazing pages. Albie Sachs is holding the constitutional guidelines in March '88 in his right hand, and the next month it was blown to smithereens in that bomb blast that we all know about. So I just want to say also, the message to South Africans is, let us not forget what it took to bring out this constitution. And the final photographs, I think, show that, because there's Dulcie September and Griffiths and Victoria Mklenge, which Bulelani has written about again with beautiful empathy in the book, who were violently murdered for trying to bring about a country where the rule of law meant something. And the women are a very important part of the story. And there is Ruth Mompati, Ivy Kasaburi, and Bridget Mabandla, who at two seminars made major inputs which totally changed the position of the ANC to women's rights by December 1989. All this happened before February 1990. Thank you very much.
I think we're going to do it from here now. I don't know if I'm audible. Can you hear me? Is it on? Okay. The famous words, is it on? Okay. All right, so what we'll do now is we've gone a little bit over time, and I was asked to make sure the audience doesn't complain about being here for more than an hour and 15 minutes. So we're going to let you make your input, Albie, and then we'll move into Thandi's, yeah.
Yes. I'd like you to see the younger Albie. I've learned to fly since then, but I was a pretty good speaker. Can we have the film? This was filmed at that famous in-house seminar in Lusaka in March 1988. And it gives you an idea of who the participants were and what the ambience was. That's where we were putting forward the constitutional guidelines. Max Sisulu is speaking from the audience. The camera didn't capture his sound very well, but you see the space, and then afterwards you'll see the younger Albie.
And today I come across the program which you have in front of you. It says, I must speak. on professionals. I know nothing about it. So some of the other issues that Thabo raised are very important. Perhaps we would have benefited if we had discussed them, together. Now that we've discussed them, or we've discussed them, I don't know how we're going to go about it, because our people will only be ready, depending on how fast the legal department works, we'll do it in the technical secretariat. But we are ready to speak on Friday,
And this document, the guidelines, has to be seen as a weapon, as an instrument in that context. And like any struggle, as our military comrades are always telling us, you've got to know your terrain. You've got to know your weapons. You have to be scientific about these things. And in the case of the struggle on the political, legal, ideological front, you have to know the terrain. And this is a terrain that's not established by yourselves. It's established by history. It's there. And you have to know your weapons, just like people have to study how a limpet mine functions and operates. So we have to study constitutions. We have to study different systems of electoral practice. We have to study different forms of government. We have to know these things in order to convert these into weapons that we can use effectively. But what guarantees do you offer? And it's usually to the whites, but not just to the whites. To the coloreds, to the Indians, if you like, to the Zulus and so on. This is what the question is being put to us all the time. What guarantees do you offer? And the ANC has been relatively silent on this question, except for certain January the 8th statements, because the ANC is involved in the process of analyzing, thinking about it, finding the right formulations. And that is the question that these guidelines, the fundamental question these guidelines are intended to address. And this is the context in which the theme of a Bill of Rights becomes a central question, a fundamental question, not just a passing question.
I loved that, seeing that film. It was the last time my right arm was captured in film. And what was my right arm doing? It was holding up constitutional guidelines. You know, if somebody was writing a bad Hollywood movie script, they'd have the central character holding up the guidelines and his last act, and then he's blown up afterwards. And the director would say, no, that's too cliche. Life isn't like that, but life was like that. And it's reaffirming for me to see that young Albie, full of confidence, and a confidence that came from the methodology, the styles of work, this movement that took me in, that embraced me. And you saw the audience. If ever there was an African document made in Africa by Africans with an African vision and sensibility and broadness of vision, it was our Constitution. And I lived through that. I saw that. I became the great champion of the Bill of Rights. People say, oh, Albie Sachs introduced the Bill of Rights into ANC discourse. It was exactly the opposite. I was a rights skeptic. I didn't believe in giving too much power to the judges. I believe Parliament should be the center of political authority, and battles should be fought out in the streets and in Parliament. The ANC persuaded me in South African conditions, where the enemy, as we called them then, was relying on forms of power sharing between racial and ethnic groups, so that one day we would have 3 presidents, Mandela on Monday, de Klerk on Tuesday, Buthelezi on Wednesday, each representing a different section and each having a power of veto over the others. It would have introduced apartheid into our new so-called democratic constitution. And instead, the answer was a Bill of Rights. If people want to look at why the ANC adopted a Bill of Rights, as Andre pointed out, it's not because of Gorbachev. It's not because of the Berlin Wall falling. It certainly wasn't because Albie Sachs, this enlightened white guy who'd been around the world and so on, introduced the theme into the ANC. As I said, I was hostile to the Bill of Rights. I was persuaded by the ANC to accept it. And the two heroes of our constitutional story are Pallo Jordan and Oliver Tambo. And all of that is documented in detail in this book. And Pallo deserves so much credit for having been asked by Oliver Tambo after the Kabwe Conference in 1985, when our movement is striving to make apartheid unworkable and South Africa ungovernable. And we have the four pillars of struggle: the mass mobilization, underground work, international pressure, and armed struggle. At the same time, Pallo is producing a paper. He's been asked for the vision of a new South Africa. And Pallo was a lefty, the new left. We were old left, a lefty, independent-minded, spirited. And he said the answer is ANC tradition of majority rule in a united South Africa coupled with the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights will defend the rights of everybody, not because they're Zulus or white or Afrikaans speaking, because they're human beings. That's the source of equality in South Africa. The individual rights were not individualistic rights that I can do what I damn well like as long as I don't interfere with others. They were in a community setting, but on the basis of full equality. And he argued the case very, very beautifully. It was sent to the NEC, and Oliver Tambo knew how to navigate that process. The Communist Party, the Nationalists, the unions back home, the underground people, the guerrillas, Chris Hani, wonderful people, each great in their own sphere, their own particular form of activity. Tembeka, the diplomat, how to get them all on board and how to develop texts which could then become the ANC program, if you like, for a future democratic South Africa, to get the African Union to take it up. So it's a document that comes from Africa. One of the great surprises that I learned from the research that we did, interviews with Thabo Mbeki, with Penel Maduna and others, was that the Harare Declaration, which contained all our guidelines spelled out very substantially in terms of the vision of New South Africa, the Harare Declaration under a new name was adopted in the General Assembly of the United Nations by acclamation at a time when Margaret Thatcher ruled the roost in England and Ronald Reagan in America. They couldn't resist this program. And if you follow the steps that de Klerk took afterwards, step by step, he followed the program laid down for him, all starting with our crazy dreams in Lusaka through the Constitutional Committee. I'm going to mention a couple of little details that I discovered in the writing of the book that captured my imagination and indicate that this book is full of authenticated detail of a time. The one was how Makma Raj, pretending to be sick, recovering in hospital in Moscow, was secretly in underground in South Africa. And he's liaising with Nelson Mandela in prison. And he's using the most advanced techniques and the oldest techniques for communicating information. The most advanced technique was a form of internet, sending messages by that early internet to Holland, to London, back to Lusaka. And the most ancient was a handshake of lawyers passing little messages. So that combination of brilliant advanced technology and good old-fashioned subterfuge meant that Mandela all the way through was kept in touch and was assuring people in Lusaka he's not going on an independent jaunt of his own. Another little detail that struck me was after the Battle of Kutakinavali, which the regime could have won if they'd carried on. They stopped. Cuban troops came. Then there was a pincer movement. There was an air battle over Angola. And it turned out the MiGs being flown by the Cuban pilots were much smarter than the aging Mirage supplied by France. So the forces supporting the liberation movement won the air war, and that's why the troops had to come out, and that led to a whole sequence of events, independence for Namibia. So there's lots of detail of that kind, of the personality of the character. I didn't know when I was sitting at meetings in a small little space in Lusaka. Below there was a repair shop, and the repair shop was preparing trucks to take tourists to South Africa, and in the bottom of the trucks would be munitions. The armed struggle continues, the intellectual struggle continues, as I was saying, and if I had any role at all that was important, I was the rapporteur. I wasn't the creator of the ideas. I received the ideas. They came politically to us. I was maybe quite a good propagandist for the ideas, like converts are often more enthusiastic than people who've been believers all along. I'm going to conclude with a challenge. Andre said he feels humble. I never feel humble in these situations. I feel proud. I feel great. So I'm not going to pretend to humility. And to carry it further, I think this is actually a terrific book. He didn't just make the book together. Andre doing the bulk of the research, the bulk of the writing. I'm making editorial contributions all along. We arm wrestled. And I always point out, oh, Andre's got more arms than I have. But in the end, we found agreement, and it gave the book a particular texture that I think is particularly rich, particularly strong, and particularly readable. This book has laid down a marker. We need 3 more books to have at least a dependable narrative of how we got our Constitution. We don't have it. We have a kind of vacuum. We have some very shallow stories. People, nature abhors a vacuum, journalists abhor a vacuum. If there's a vacuum, they tell their stories, sometimes more credibly than others. We need a book on the return, the period 90, 91, 92. How did we agree on how to have the Constitution, how to take decisions, who would be represented? At one stage we felt the masses must be there, the unions must be there, the women's movement must be there, faith community, and then we decided no. Who would be there? How would decisions be taken? And at the same time we are preparing. We had commissions, workshops on land, on having a constitutional court and social economic rights. We came prepared. We had commissions on regional government, workshops with lots of scientists, people from abroad, local people. It wasn't an ANC study group. This was an ANC sponsored with the University of the Western Cape playing an enormously important role, providing logistical and intellectual backup for these meetings. These stories need to be told. The role of the Peace Commission, the peace accords, extremely important. That's come out now. But all this has to be tied together in a well-researched, well-told book. And it might have a completely different format to the Andre with Albie kibitzing all the time. We need a book on the period from December 92, December 91, to the first democratic elections. It was a period of turmoil, of low-grade civil war. I discovered, preparing for this book beforehand, there were 40,000 white soldiers, men, half in the army, half outside the army, waiting for Constant Viljoen to give the command. They were so excited. And he came to the meeting and they were completely deflated when he said no. And he said no because of some very astute diplomacy. by people like Benwell Maduna and Thabo Mbeki and others, that ended up with a crazy section, I think it's 238 or 258 in the Constitution, about the possibility, theoretical possibility, of a Buddhist state. That's all, theoretical possibility that Parliament has to adopt. We know about the RVB crashing in. We don't know about the 40,000 in much more serious danger. And the impact of Chris Hani's assassination, the low-grade civil war, the Third Force, the Goldstone Commission, the CCB being revealed, as much happening outside as inside the chamber. And then the breakdown, the causes of the breakdown, the renegotiation. That story needs to be told in a credible way, based on sources, based on documentation. Many of us are still alive, the documents are there. The Constitutional Hill Trust now has digitized the full archive of all the documents of CODESA 1, CODESA 2, and of the Constitutional Assembly. And then it's a completely new game, the elected parliament in Cape Town, with people from the women's movement, from the workers' movement, ex-prisoners, exiles, people from the right wing, the Buddhist state supporters, they're all in there. It's an amazing story, reaching out to the people to get their inputs. It's a wonderful story waiting to be told. It's not told. So people can say, oh, there was a deal between Mandela and de Klerk advised by some business people. For me, it's so destructive of our own history. We speak about erasing our history. And it's people from the oppressed community are erasing our intelligence, our capacity, our skills, our traditions, our culture, our vision, our leaders of different kinds. We need to tell our own story, inventing nothing. And that's a challenge to South Africa to have books or films or podcasts or whatever modalities based on documentation. They can have multiple voices. They can be challenged from many different points of view. And, people like to say, the last years of my life available to me, what I want to do is to see that these books are brought out. But I'm going to say it anyhow. What I want to do, and I think we can work with people like Vali Musa, who's got a fantastic collection of the documents. We can work through the Oliver Adelaide Tambo Foundation. We can work through the Constitutional Trust. We can work through the new generation of young scholars who've got to see it's a challenge and it's an opportunity and it's a delight waiting. We can work with civil society. We can work with academia. We can work with multiple different voices. Let these stories be told. Let them be told in a credible, viable way. Let this simply be volume 1 of a 4-part series on how we South Africans got our Constitution. Thank you.
Thanks, Albie. So Thandi and I had a bit of a chat before we came here because I wanted a sense of her thinking. And you were saying that, did you say nature abhors a vacuum? Academics love vacuums. They call it the gap in the literature. And then what they do is they go into that gap where angels, shouldn't even go there. So, and so one of the biggest struggles we've had is that tendency for academics to rush into the gap, and we're incentivized and we're paid for it. And it's been a problem. It's been a problem because we've lacked all this level of detail and insight. But you're going to be an academic, and you also come from a family that's steeped in its own activist traditions, and you're also a trained lawyer. And I think for me, the discussion is how or what is there a generational burden to carry around understanding this history and understanding it as it kind of is told here, as it unfolded, and what is the generational engagement with the problem of this history? from your point of view.
Nomalanga, thank you. It's a huge privilege to be sitting here today, and also without COVID, to be able to interact. But something that you mentioned in your foreword that I think is pertinent for me too is, during my 20 years of studying history formally, I always felt a great divergence between what I learned within the university setting and what I learned outside of it. I'm sorry, yeah. And I think I feel the same way, that a lot of the stories that have been told in this book are stories that I didn't learn in law school, but stories that I learned through conversations with my family, that were able to center me in terms of how I was able to analyze my own research and the role of the Constitution in shaping our freedom. I think another important point that you make in your foreword is that, dear Comrade President, makes the case that the path to 1994 was indeed a history of African-rooted initiative, agency, intellectualism, and political genius, based on solidarity with inclusive universal perspectives against a backdrop of global power inequalities and the systemic violence churned out by centuries of colonialism and apartheid. I think that's a very important aspect for us to remember, because we often assume that the Constitution was something that was imposed on us. We forget that it was something that was embedded in our political struggle. That was also, Judge Albie always reminds us that the role of Africa in securing our liberation, from Lusaka to Dakar to Mozambique, this pertinent role that continues to affect those countries in horrible ways that we don't account for as young people. And just on a last point, you know, I was at UWC for the launch there, and Paulo Jordan made a very profound statement to us. He said that we take for granted as young people our freedom and our rights. We've got access to sexual and reproductive health rights. We've got access to gender and sexuality rights. And in the US at the moment, there's a rollback on abortion. That has a direct impact on us in South Africa through the way that aid is distributed. And so how we are able to claim our rights is something that is an ongoing political struggle. The women outside reminding us about our duties towards our society forms part of what this Constitution means for us politically. And I think that we need to start understanding that if we don't value our Constitution and our history, if we don't know where we come from, we don't know where we're going. And I think that's a very important narrative for us to recall. So this book for me has been really helpful. And the end notes, like you said, have been great sources for empirical research. Yeah.
I mean, one of the questions I had asked you earlier, I just have one more question for her. It's the time for the youth. So I think that issue of, is there an over-reliance on the Constitution? Because of, in some way, the legacy of a very well-crafted document is that it becomes so heavyweight in our society. Now, everything that happens in South Africa seems to lead to the Constitutional Court. Is there an over-reliance on the Constitution? And on the one hand, and on the other, is there a legitimate rejection of the Constitution by, you know, I mean, most expressed by fallists?
Yeah, Nomalanga, you refer to it in the foreword as constitutional skepticism. And it is something that I think is problematic. There has been an over-reliance on the Constitution in order to advance our society, in order to protect our society, without us as lawyers actually being aware of the personal being political. Of the fact that, for example, we talk about the Freedom Charter. The Women's Charter is a history that is left out, and it's recorded in our book, in Andre's book, not just as something that was part of the women's movement, but was something that was part of struggle of women being excluded from the Constitutional Committee and from the National Executive Committee, and that bears direct impact on our society today. At the same time, our Constitution is also something that allows us to disrupt society. It gives us direct access. So as lawyers and as judges, we have a huge responsibility to understand our Constitution politically, not just legally. This is something that is not just about adherence to the rule of law as it would be in a liberal democracy or ensuring multi-party democracy with regular elections. It is a document that allows us to disrupt our society. It's a document that allows us to expand and to translate into policy what we expect our political economy to look like towards the advancement of social justice. It's the only constitution in the world that recognizes the right to dignity, comprehensive substantive equality, and social justice. These are not things that we should take lightly. It was the first constitution in the world to constitutionalize the right to a clean environment. This is something that people are advocating for in Latin America, in Asia. We are in a space right now where we can hold corporates accountable for destruction to the environment. So these are things that we really need to admire from our ancestors and our forefathers for being so forward-thinking, for providing us with a document that allows us to reconstruct our society on our own terms. I don't think we should take that for granted. Thank you.
I'm worried now about the sound. I was hoping to now open up for questions or comments with Albie, everybody here. Will he be able to switch on this mic? Because giving feedback. Oh, you've got that thing. Okay. All right. So I think let's open up for questions or comments.
Hearing aids which interfere with the mics.
Okay. Yeah. Help you explain?
Thank you so much for an incredible panel. It's really such an honor to be listening tonight. I think my question was alluded to earlier. We're seeing kind of an increase in criticism for the Constitution by the very party or members of the very party that fought for the Constitution to be instituted. And I'm wondering, how do we live in a society where many feel that the Constitution has let them down? How do we defend this document that is giving us so much rights to people that have been excluded from our society, that is not able to be in a room like this because of the socio-economic circumstances of this country? Thank you.
Okay, so skepticism about the Constitution from the ANC itself, criticism of the Constitution from within the ANC itself, is that sufficient? Okay. Yeah, a few. I just need to translate to the stage.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Kwezi Kampumlwana. I work on World Heritage Matters. I really welcome everything that I have heard here, and I just rise on 3 items. This last point that was raised, how do we protect our Constitution from abuse of process? So it's a good thing, but people know how to scam things where now they're not violating the rights of the state, but I violate his rights and I get better constitutional protection than him because the onus is on him to enforce it. Secondly, I work on the World Heritage nomination of sites that demonstrate that South Africa's struggle was of universal importance. And the current one is known as Human Rights, Liberation, Struggle and Reconciliation. I find huge resonance of the book that you have so beautifully prepared with that nomination, which is before UNESCO. And I think, I'm wondering what is the way in which the work you have been doing can support the nomination that we are busy with. And then lastly, you've mentioned that Freedom Charter was the mother of what you have been working on. The site at which Freedom Charter originated, the Walter Sisulu Square in Kliptown, is in huge danger. I think there has to be a call for action for people to do different things necessary to restore that site to what it should be and to protect places like this and others going forward. And lastly, what you have done, I think, deserves to go into the Memory of the World program. Thank you very much.
I just didn't catch it. I missed the name of the site. I missed the... Oh, Kliptown. Sorry. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so the first point was about protecting us from the abuse of process. So, how do we protect the Constitution from the abuse of process? Because it appears that we've set up a legal or a social or political culture where people abuse process, because in some sense, yeah, ne? Yeah. Mm.
To invade the home
Yes.
campaign, a born one. Their constitutional rights are made to look better than mine.
yours. Yeah.
And what that does, it puts the Constitution in a bad light to me or the person that lives in the home next door. Because the guy that can invade, I must now find an alternative place for where he must go without answering where was he coming from and all of that.
Okay. And then the second was that the South African Constitution, the struggle against apartheid is being put up as a universal struggle. Yeah, for UNESCO. Mm.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay, so supporting the process of having the South African liberation struggle being sort of elevated and nominated at the level of UNESCO as a universal struggle, as a struggle of universal relevance. So he's just asking, how do we...
What was the first one?
Oh, the first one was that the Constitution enables abuse of process.
Enable us to?
It enables the abuse of process. So, yeah. So, yeah, this idea that this Constitution, actually, it gives too much rights. So, and I think it's a question that's constantly coming up in South Africa. And then the last one was about Kliptown and the deterioration of the site. So I think let's have some responses. And then, yeah, do you want to start? Who wants to go first?
Okay, the last one. There are many good reasons for having our capital city in Johannesburg or Pretoria or Midrand. There's one reason for keeping Cape Town, but I think that reason is overwhelming. It keeps the Western Cape as part of the African continent. And it prevents the secessionist theme that's potentially so dangerous with the black minority in a non-black environment, colored people, whites, feeling that they are being disregarded, marginalized, poorer, appealing to Pretoria to come and protect them, and the people creating a kind of defensive, basically racist alliance in the Western Cape. For me, the unity of South Africa requires Parliament to remain in Cape Town, and that the practical problems can be overcome with virtual things and so on. In terms of the abuse of the Constitution, I feel in some ways as an advocate who practiced in the apartheid days a sense of amusement. We used every trick to try and, if they, applying apartheid through the law, we will use the law defensively as much as we can. So we didn't call it the Stalingrad tactic or strategy, but we used administrative law, we invented, we created, we had brilliant lawyers, occasionally decent judges would help us. And now with amusement, I see it looks as though the converse in the mirror is happening. And it's up to the judiciary to decide, but you pay a price for the rule of law. And I think it's a price worth paying, even if people protract and extend and so on. Rather that than dictatorship, rather that than detention without trial, rather that possibilities of torture. The UNESCO, I think once these 4 books are written, we've got then materials to justify some kind of something that can be given to the world. But I'm not sure that UNESCO could undertake it as a project. But we need it as a project for South Africa, for ourselves, for people who have no idea about this two-state process of constitution making, the causes of the breakdown, the issues that were debated, the role of the Constitutional Court in declaring the Constitution to be unconstitutional, sending it back, how Thabo Mbeki's wonderful I'm an African speech fitted in. People just have no idea about that. So I think that's the first education we have to do, is to ourselves. For many years, we were an inspiration to the world. The biggest civil society international movement in the world since the abolition of slavery was the anti-apartheid movement. It'll be wonderful if we can rekindle some of that spirit, but based on actions, on deeds, on overcoming our present problems, which are very grave, with the same spirit, quality of leadership, cohesiveness in new conditions, then we will have a wonderful, not even a postscript, wonderful sequel to get that same form of international attention.
Andre, the abuse of process?
Thanks. It was about criticism from within the ANC and the abuse.
Is it switched on? Is it okay?
I think for me,
this one was causing feedback, but let's try. Okay, let's see. Okay, try that.
Okay, thank you. I'm hoping the book, or I'm trying to stay out of today's arguments, because I want us not to forget or not to not attend to the kind of issues and the achievements that we're trying to show about history. But I don't think, you know, we've heard in the last week again, including from very respected people in this room, that the ANC today is unfortunately not the ANC that fought that struggle in 85 to 89 in terms of the vision and the kind of and this of where South Africa needs to go in terms of its constitution and democracy. It's unthinkable, unimaginable even for me to think that in 1990, for instance, someone like Tambo or Walter Sisulu or even any returning ANC person could walk into a hospital and have a so-called foreigner, a person who is vulnerable, brought out in front of them and to talk to them as them and to humiliate them. It has to be said, especially if one reads this book and knows that story, that it was not just African agency that brought freedom and the Constitution, it was also African and international solidarity. This Constitution is an us Constitution. It is not the us and them politics that we hear about all the time today. So I think people are saying, you know, it's not about who wins in December. It is what the ANC, how the ANC manages to renew itself or not. It's pretty, there's a pretty desperate situation. And I think we need the courage, the inventiveness, the counterintuitive thinking, the new thinking that we saw in the 80s when perhaps things had reached a certain stage of orthodoxy where you needed something new to unlock it. We've got to move with new ideas, new politics, and hopefully the ANC will somehow manage to renew itself. But from a constitutional perspective today, it is bleak news really when one sees the lack of, the speaking against it. And I think part of any renewal will have to be to reclaim the spirit and the vision of Tambo and the foundation people of the Constitution.
I'm going to give Thandi a chance to talk about this issue of abuse of process, I don't know, from a lawyer, and then we will take one last comment. Yeah.
Well, I think what Judge Albie said was extremely pertinent. You know, we have to adhere to the rule of law. If the rule of law allows for certain processes to take place, it's not about whether we like it or not, it's about adherence to the rule of law. And I think the amazing thing about our Constitution is that all of us have access to justice. I used to work at the Human Rights Commission, and one of the complaints we would receive is, why should prisoners receive the same sort of rights as those who are not in prison? Why must my taxpayers' money go to prisons? It's a reflection of our dignity as a society, how we want to treat other people in our society. So with respect to the rule of law, I don't think there's an abuse of process per se. I do think that there is an over-reliance, as we spoke about, on our constitution to rectify our society. The judicialization of politics is something that is not being interrogated, I think, sufficiently enough within our broader political discourse. And those are conversations that we need to continue having. A constitution is about contestation. And I think the more conversations we have, the more vibrant our democracy becomes.
But does it not speak to the fact that there's no social contract, that we don't have a social consensus, so we have to turn to the law? Isn't that more dangerous, that there's no context, there's no conception in South Africa of norms that we can agree on, that we're going to know how to behave? You know, with your parents, it's that look, and then you know how to behave. They don't have to bring out a rule book. And, you know, most of us grew up in communities where you just knew that these are the norms here. Nobody has to read me the Riot Act. How do you think a society like ours, a plural society, is going to deal with? Because I think that's why the Constitution keeps getting evoked, because we can't agree on what is a normative way to be in South Africa.
But that's exactly what the Constitution is supposed to be. It is our social contract. And I think part of the failure of our society at the moment is a lack of human rights education, a lack of political education, a lack of education of our history, that we come from a vibrant sense of African constitutionalism. And what does that mean within our current social context? That is something, again, that I think is an important contribution from our book, is that there's the sense of this book or the history was formulated in a particular social, political, economic, legal context. And we need to pay homage to that context. I think part of the challenge that we're having at the moment is that we don't look at our current discourse in context. And yeah, I do think that there's space for that contestation.
Yeah.
Thanks. I don't want my input to be a kind of nostalgia about the past that we must return to. The biggest problem in South Africa today is the massive inequality, the exclusion of people from the socio-economic mainstream. And that is the key political task of everyone to achieve. And only then will we really protect democracy and the Constitution. But we must be very careful of easy promises. And as Thandi said, this global trend of a right-wing reaction that sort of uses exclusion, the them, is a sure sign of the kind of reactionary trend in global politics that's becoming dominant in many places. And there's a very good chance that that could happen here too, if we do not get down to that task of socio-economic reconstruction. So I believe after 30 years, we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to energize our politics to protect and make the Constitution relevant. And that's a massive task. And in that sense, the vision is not only Tambo and Sisulu, it is also Sobukwe and Biko and other people. All those, for me, Africanism, black consciousness, and non-racialism are not siloed opposite things. They are interconnected, and there's been over history a swing along a continuum from one and then another one dominates. We can see that going right back to the 1880s, in fact, when the Ethiopian church movement came out as an assertion of black consciousness. And we saw it in the 70s and the 80s, and again with Black Lives Matter. But the theme of all those movements is a universalism, the interconnectedness of the human race. And the new politics is about othering people in a fight for resources and a very dangerous kind of factional politics. And I think that is my big fear.
Okay, so I'm going to have to move us along because we've taken up a lot of time, but this was a good engagement. Thank you, Vanessa. Any announcement that needs to be made? Yeah, you can have the mic.
Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up to celebrate the life and the contributions of a truly remarkable South Africa. It is the birthday of our father, Oliver Tambo, and it's a life that symbolizes the best of humankind and the best of us as South Africa. It's a life lived in a way that enabled us to be our better selves. And it's true that today the world is quite a frightening place. Sadly, we are not alone as South Africans, but typically South Africans, we always think we're the best of everything, including the best of the worst behaved people. And so it's scary when we look at some of the things which are happening. But it's also, I think one of the panelists said, I think it was you, Andre, in many ways we should be careful what we wish for. I can speak for myself and many people of my age and older. I don't think we thought we would ever be free. We all used to raise our fists high and say, Nkululeko, Nkok. I can promise you, I didn't think I would ever go and vote. Well, today we can. How we use that vote is very important. But what we've also done with that vote is that we haven't just created a mess for today. We have built a constitutional court. We have built a constitution. And Andre, one of your last points about any society has to consciously keep pace with itself and its own development. So whilst I'm terrified about the fact that we are at the crossroads, as the world is, I also understand that we should be careful what we wish for. And so today we have this thing called freedom. And so today we gather to celebrate the life of one of our fathers, Oliver Tambo. And I want to also give thanks to the family and to the many families who are present here today, because this came at a price to many, many families too. And that's an aspect that's often not acknowledged and spoken about. So I want us to take courage from the fact that when we benchmark amidst all this chaos in the world, including our country, that we still have a constitution and a court that people do invoke as the mothers outside are. And so, Andre, Albie, and everyone who have been party to this remarkable start on this journey of telling our own history and singing our own songs, Albie's point. We need to, from time to time, celebrate the remarkable achievements of where we are. And so I want to conclude by just firstly thanking yourselves, because you are all people who don't just defend the Constitution, because it's much bigger than that. It's about promoting the Constitution, the principles of constitutionalism, and the rule of law. And every one of you in this room play different roles in doing that. And in particular, I want to say thank you to the foundations. Maybe you should become more assertive about the roles you play in promoting. And under the promotion, we will defend that. And I think one of the points made by Thandi is that we all speak about the fact that our society is fraying apart and all over the world there's this polarization. But I do think that we cannot expect social cohesion if we do not have social solidarity. And that's at the essence of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So thank you to our panelists, to Nomalanga with the incredibly difficult task of holding this vibrant panel together. And thank you to all of you, and thank you to all the foundations who have worked together tonight to start one in the journey of one of 4 volumes, Albie, that's what you called for anecdotally, but I think it's for the complete telling of the story in order to embolden us and strengthen us on the basis of our celebration to, in fact, take forward our country to the next logical phase. So thank you very much, everybody who has been here tonight and who made this work. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, thank you. I'd like to remind you that we invite you to have some snacks. We'll move some of the chairs out of the middle so that there's room for you to move about. The book is on sale from Exclusive Books, and Albie and Andre would be very happy to sign if you wish to have your book signed. Anne Nomalanga, who wrote the foreword to the book. Did she say that? She wrote the foreword to the book. It's a thesis in itself and worth reading on its own. So thank you very much, and that concludes the formal proceedings. And I do have to say that there's a power shutdown at 8 o'clock, but there is a generator, there will be some lights, but just a reminder. Okay, thank you very much for your presence.
I'm good at falling, eh?
Pardon? You're good at,
I know how to fall. Yeah.
In future, I'm not letting you do that.
Okay.